Animal mummies of ancient Egypt. Why were animals mummified in ancient Egypt? There were four reasons why. One, food for the afterlife for the deceased, beloved pets, cult animals, and ritual offerings. We will now discuss animal mummies as ritual offerings. When someone wished for a favor from a god, he or she would leave an offering in the god's temple. A mummified animal would be more affordable to the common person than a bronze statue. These mummies would be buried in special cemeteries at various cult centers in ancient Egypt. Literally millions of animal mummies have been found by archaeologists in the last 2 centuries, which point to the existence of an extensive animal mummy industry. The ibis was one of the most frequently mummified animals. These birds were widely domesticated in ancient Egypt. The selected ibis was thought to be killed by immersion in vats of molten resin. Some were eviscerated, but most were not. Some ibises were wrapped in many yards of linen bandages, often with stylishly decorated applique. The falcon was another commonly mummified animal. During the late dynastic and Greco-Roman periods, falcons, like the sacred ibis, were killed, mummified, and interred in mass burials. But unlike the ibises, falcons were not easily raised in captivity. Perhaps millions of falcons, representing several species, especially the kestrel, were mummified. Falcons were often intricately wrapped in linen bandaging with geometric patterns. Sometimes they were given painted masks and placed in decorated coffins, much like their human counterparts. Crocodiles were also mummified in ancient Egypt. Most crocodile mummies do not show evidence of evisceration. They were probably cured with natron or even salt before wrapping. Both adults and juvenile crocodiles were mummified. Some burials included crocodile eggs containing recognizable fetuses. Crocodile cemeteries containing thousands of mummies and eggs were known from a number of sites in Egypt. Cats were commonly mummified in ancient Egypt. Many cats were killed by strangulations or by a blow to the head. After death, the guts were removed and the body cavity filled with earth or sand. To produce a compact object, the forelimbs were stretched down over the body, and the hind limbs were tucked up against the pelvis, while the tail was curled up between the feet. The body was wrapped in bandages that had been soaked in natron or treated with resin. On some mummies, faces were painted on in black ink. Some mummies were placed into highly decorated coffins or life-size wooden or bronze statues. In the 19th century, shiploads of mummified Egyptian cats were sent to England to be turned into fertilizer. At least 180,000 cat mummies, which amounts to 19 tons, were sent to Liverpool, where they were sold by the ton. Sometimes mummies were found to contain bones from more than one species, or sometimes they only had a fragment of a whole animal, or sometimes they were of a completely different species, or sometimes they just contained cloth, brick, feathers, and pottery. The true dummy mummy. With beautiful wrappings, these counterfeit animal mummies were sold to unsuspecting pilgrims. Probably many of them had been produced when business was slow. There are many fewer canine mummies than cat mummies that have been found. Sinopolis was the cult center for Anubis in ancient Egypt. The animal mummy at the Albany Institute of History and Art presents a curiosity. It was purchased from the Metropolitan Museum of Art as a cat mummy in 1958, and it was dated to be about 2,000 years old. In 2002, it was brought to Albany Medical Center for X-rays and CT scans. The X-rays unmasked the mummy's true identity. Notice the difference in skull shapes. The Albany Institute of Art mummy, shown on the left, clearly has a canine skull. The X-ray on the right from another museum shows a distinctly feline skull. Was this a case of counterfeit? We don't know. And we do have additional questions. What kind of animal was this? A young animal or an old animal? The teeth would suggest that this was a baby animal, as well as the evidence of growth plates in the vertebrae. And what kind of canine would this have been? Could this really have been a dog? Or could this have been a young jackal? These questions remain unanswered, and it will be up to the future generations of museum goers to find the answers.